Yeah, that was pretty shocking to us as well at the time. So when we entered from Tajikistan into Xinjiang province, we had to give the border police our phones and our laptop and SD cards, etc., and give our passwords to the phones and the laptop, and then everything was taken into a separate room and was scanned.
Welcome back to The Pursuit Zone, a podcast that interviews explorers from around the globe to bring you their exciting stories. These are people that dream big, break out of their comfort zones, and take on ambitious pursuits. This is episode 178 with Tim and Linda from Peddling the Planet. In this episode, I catch up with them while they're in Indonesia waiting for a ferry, and we have a chance to talk about the last 15 months of their cycling adventure. So let's start the show, and let me introduce my guests. For Tim and Linda, it's been over 400 days on the road so far since cycling away from Europe in the spring of 2018. Some of the highlights include a month through Turkey, riding through the Pamir Mountains in Tajikistan, and cycling for 3 months in China. You can learn more about their adventure at peddlingtheplanet.wordpress.com. Tim and Linda, welcome to the Pursuit Zone.
Hello, thanks for having us.
Hello, thank you very much.
Great to be here.
Guys, where are you from?
I am from England, from a small town in the countryside of Worcestershire. It's called Bewdley, and it's quite small, so maybe 10,000 people or so. And it's right on the outskirts of Birmingham, really, so not too far away from the bigger city.
And I'm originally from Germany, from a place called Magdeburg, which is about an hour and a half away from Berlin. And a few years ago, I moved to England, so I moved to Manchester. When I lived there, I at first didn't know so many people, but then I started going to like a weekly couch surfing meeting kind of thing. And that's also where I met Tim, because when he moved to Manchester, he also went to that event, and that's where we met.
Yeah, so before this trip, we were based in Manchester.
Did you guys go to university?
Yeah, I did. So I went near a city called Stoke-on-Trent in England, and I studied physics and music tech. Then I also studied in Denmark for a couple of years, doing a master's. And recently I've just finished a PhD, and that was in Manchester, doing audio technology.
And I studied back home in Germany. I studied psychology, but I never actually worked in that field. So when I still lived in Germany, I had a few different jobs that weren't really related to psychology. And then I moved to Manchester and worked there.
And how did you guys get interested in cycle touring? What was it that sparked the idea for this adventure?
Well, I guess we've both always cycled to places. Like, we wouldn't call ourselves cyclists, but we've always commuted by bike and just used it as a mode of transport. But then maybe 5 or 6 years ago, I was hitchhiking around Iceland, so I was in quite an adventurous mindset. And I was reading a book by someone else who had done the same thing for my hometown. And that kind of planted a seed in my mind about one day I need to do something like this. And ever since, I've read lots more books, and it was always just confirmed that this would be a great thing to do, to go on a big cycle adventure. And I was just waiting for the right time, really. And after the PhD, that was it. So we packed our bags and set off.
As Tim said, I've been cycling all my life as well, just commuting, as is very common in Germany, but didn't really have any contact with cycle touring as such until the time when I moved to Manchester and met Tim and some other people in our group of friends who had also done some cycle touring. So a friend of ours did a big trip as well about 2 years ago. And when Tim told me about his plan, that really sparked my interest as well. And I was like, can I come? So yeah, we started planning it as the thing we'd do together.
Tim, I'm curious about the book, the person from your hometown that wrote it. What was the book?
It was called Why Don't You Fly? And it's by a guy called Chris Smith, I think his name is. And this was maybe, 15, 20 years ago that he did this trip. So times have changed quite a lot. So it's probably easier now than when he did it. But yeah, he wrote about his adventures from my hometown, Bewdley, all the way to Beijing. So that really inspired me, along with other books like Alistair Humphreys and all the classics.
How much money did you have to save up before you felt comfortable setting out?
So we didn't really have a saving goal as such. We were both fortunate enough to have savings anyway. So we just worked before the trip. Tim was earning money for his PhD and me and my job. So we just kind of lived normally, but with fairly frugal anyway, and had savings. So we just knew the time to do it, which was after Tim would finish his PhD. We had enough money to do it. So like at the moment, after about 1.25 years, we've spent a total of about 4,000 euros, so $4,500 per person, which includes things like day-to-day spending, visas, bike repairs and replacements, and transport, including a flight to Australia that we'll take in August. So just for day-to-day spending, it's about €6 or $7 per person per day.
Very impressive. You guys are very frugal.
Yeah, it's a bit of a challenge, really. And it's also kind of the cool thing to do with cycle touring. Like, if you see a cycle tourist and they spend like $30 a night on hotels, then, I don't know, people look at them a bit differently.
Yeah, I think it's a bit frowned upon in the community.
Yeah, so it's just the thing to do to try and spend as little as possible, I think.
Tell me about your bikes.
So our bikes are quite different from each other. So I have got a cyclocross bike. So not your typical touring setup. It's aluminium with a carbon fork. It's a Marin Lombard, I think it is. So we've just got rear panniers each to keep things as lightweight and simple as possible. Just a classic like gravel cyclocross bike with 700C wheels, disc brakes, and pannier rack with 2 panniers in the back.
And mine is a Genesis Tour de Fer, so a steel bike with hand-built wheels, disc brakes, Schwalbe Marathon Mondial tires, which we both have. Yeah, also 700C wheels, 27 gears, so 3 in the front and 9-speaker set. Yeah, as Tim said, back panniers, and then handlebar bag, rack top bag, etc.
Yeah, I guess I did change quite a few things about my bike to make it suitable for touring, because the gearing was originally standard road gearing, and that would no way have been sensible for a trip like this. So I changed some of the gears to make it easier for the steep hills. And also, got some better wheels that would last a bit longer and that kind of stuff, just to make it a bit more suitable.
So these were bikes that you already owned, or did you have to buy them before the trip?
We bought them for the trip. So we bought them secondhand, with the trip in mind.
Although it was a bit half and half for me. Like, maybe I bought it a year before the trip with the intention of using it as a normal bike for a year and then using it as a touring bike.
Now, when I was going through your blog, you had mentioned once or twice that you guys have some sort of guidebook that you're using. And also you mentioned you were getting information from the Adventure Cycle Touring Handbook. So I'm wondering, were those the two that are one in the same book that you were talking about?
This Adventure Cycle Touring Handbook is absolutely priceless for anyone planning a cycle tour. We don't really use it on the tour so much, but especially before the tour, reading up about what to take and how to plan such an adventure. So that's by Neil and Harriet Pike, if anyone wants to check that out. And that's super useful for anyone planning a tour like this. In terms of using it on the road, not so much, but it does have a bit of info about the good routes to take in certain countries. But we also read other blogs and sometimes check Lonely Planet and that kind of stuff.
Lonely Planet ebooks for some certain countries can be good as guidebooks on the road, and then also using Caravanistan for Central Asia and to a degree China to find out about visa situations and stuff like that. And then in Europe, we're also taking a few Eurovelo routes. So we had some handbooks about those that we carried with us at the time, but have since sent home.
What passports are you traveling on?
So I'm traveling on a German one.
Yeah, and me just my standard UK one. Although I think Linda's, it turns out to be a bit better than the UK one, the German one. For example, I'm not really allowed to travel independently in Iran, being British, which is quite annoying because we had to change the route a little bit. Like, we knew this before the trip, but we would have liked to go through Iran. But I think for Americans, Canadians and Brits, it's just kind of off the radar unless you hire a guide 24/7, which isn't an option when you're cycle touring. But I think you, Linda, you've not really had any problems with yours.
No, I haven't. There's been a few countries where it was a bit cheaper for me to get the visa than for Tim. But yeah, the biggest problem has probably been the fact that Tim wasn't able to go to Iran, so we couldn't go.
Yeah, super disappointing because everyone says it was one of the highlights of the bike trip. Someday, hopefully it will change.
Let's talk about some of the places that you've been. I think the first thing in your blog that caught my attention was this Iron Curtain Trail. What can you tell me about your experiences on that Iron Curtain Trail?
That's one of the Eurovelo routes, one of the newest ones, Eurovelo 13, which I can't remember right now how long the whole thing is, but we took it for about 1,000 kilometers through 4 countries. And that was really interesting and really nice landscapes. So it goes along the Iron Curtain, which divided Europe, the Cold War. Yeah, there's a lot of history. There's some signposts that tell you a bit about the history of the area. And it was just really nice cycling and really enjoyable and to explore these countries in Eastern Europe and places like Serbia and Romania and so on.
Yeah, so most of the borders of the countries are still the same today. So the route kind of skirts along the borders of many countries as opposed to delving right into the centre of them. So it's often not through the bigger cities, but quite remote the whole time. But some of the landscapes are really beautiful there.
Do you have to share the trail at any time with cars?
It's definitely not always a bike-only route, like it is along roads. But the traffic wasn't so bad from what I remember.
No, it's a long time ago now, but I think quite a lot of it was dedicated cycle lanes. But yeah, also some roads.
But yeah, there are some other routes in Europe that are more specifically dedicated cycle lanes, like the route along the Danube and the route along the Elbe as well. So there's quite a big range in Europe of cycle-only cycle routes, which is quite nice.
Yeah, we did part of the route along the Elbe before we joined the Iron Curtain Trail. So we just followed the Elbe River from my hometown to Prague in Czechia. And that was just a dedicated cycle lane.
And when you're on those dedicated cycle lanes through Europe, what's available to you for camping?
Well, most of the time in Europe, we just do wild camping. In all of our time in Europe, we paid for accommodation once, and that was at a campsite for like €2 or €3 or something. So we pretty much always found somewhere to wild camp, and also lots of warm showers and couch surfing hosts as well. But if you would prefer to stay in hotels, that kind of stuff, they're also available. So Europe is just super easy and so much flexibility in how you want to travel.
Yeah, it's just that the hotels and guest houses, they're quite expensive compared to Southeast Asia, for example, where we are now. So, in our budget, it wouldn't have really been an option to stay in Beijing. So, as Tim said, we use a lot of couch surfing and warm showers.
Yeah, but I think we never even felt the need to stay at a hotel because there were so many warm showers and couch surfing hosts. So if we felt like we needed a shower on a break, there was always someone within like 3 or 4 days ride that we could stay with.
You spent 1 month and around 2,000 kilometers going through Turkey. Tell me about some of your experiences there.
So Turkey was the first big country that we went through. Before that was Europe, and a lot of the countries in Europe are just really small. There were some that we only spent 1 or 2 days in. Being in Turkey for a whole month was amazing because we felt like we got to know the country properly, and it was also a big cultural change because we were now in a country where Islam is the main religion after Europe, where of course Christianity is the dominant one. And it was just incredible how hospitable people were. So we had heard about this before, but we couldn't really imagine it. But we were constantly invited on tea and to stay with people and given food. And everyone was just incredibly friendly. And
I agree. It's just super nice the whole time. We learned a little bit of the language because we were there for so long. But I guess we mainly use Translate anyway. Yeah, we got invited into so many people's homes to stay and tea and food. It's just great all around. The landscapes as well, super, super varied. Some really unique places like Cappadocia in central Turkey. Super nice month.
And a lot of the people that we met, like even when we were in really remote locations, everyone would be on Facebook. So they'd always want to add us on Facebook. And like we're still friends with a lot of people we met there, and they always like our stuff. And it's just a very unique experience.
How did you find the cycling there? Are the automobiles friendly towards cyclists?
Well, Istanbul was pretty hard work. Mm-hmm. There's no really good routes into the city. So you typically end up on this mega highway, which is like 6 or 7 lanes on each side. Yeah, that's just really hectic. But apart from that, the roads weren't super busy.
There was usually a pretty wide shoulder as well. When we were like on big main roads, it wasn't really a problem because there was just the hard shoulder that we could cycle on. So yeah, the traffic wasn't a big problem for us in Turkey.
Yeah, I think the biggest annoyance was probably the dogs there, because the stray dogs are absolutely humongous and super aggressive. So we would quite often be chased down the road by really, really huge dogs, and specifically sheep dogs as well. So they're there to protect the sheep from bears and wolves. So they're bred to be really, really massive. And once they see you, it can be quite dangerous unless you get the attention of the shepherd. And when that happens, if the shepherd sees you, it's all fine. But if not, then it can be quite dangerous.
Yeah, I read on your website that a Dutch girl that you had come across had been attacked and bitten by one of these sheepdogs.
Yeah, so that happened in Georgia. So in Georgia, the dogs were also pretty bad. They were quite aggressive as well, would chase us quite regularly. And we didn't really go to remote areas in Georgia, but she did. But there were a lot of sheepdogs, and on one occasion, the owners of these dogs hadn't seen her or were somewhere else, and they attacked her and bit her leg, so she had to go to the hospital and get some stitches and some rabies shots and whatnot. And when we met her, which was in Tbilisi, when we all applied for Chinese visas, she showed us the wound on her leg, which looked pretty grim.
Yeah, pretty nasty. But the shepherds were always super nice about it. So there was one time when we were coming over the crest of a hill, and Linda was up ahead, and this huge sheepdog obviously saw Linda and started running towards her. Right? But then the shepherd noticed straight away, called the dog back. But then the shepherd invited us in his field to have tea and bread and olives with him. So we just sat in the middle of this field drinking tea with the shepherd. And then, of course, he whips out his phone and gets us on Facebook. Everyone there has Facebook.
Now, I've mentioned it on this podcast before about how I think pretty much all of the guests that I have, mostly cycle tourists, I guess, that are in Georgia, they have nothing but good things to say about it. What was your experience in Georgia?
We were a bit disappointed about Georgia. We think that's mainly because of the areas that we went to. We didn't really go off the beaten track so much. It's kind of relative to the country you've just been in as well. So after Turkey, we're expecting something even bigger and even better. But we just found that, I don't know, the driving was super bad, the dogs were bad, and the people as well, they were quite grumpy. But we're not saying that's representative of the whole country, but just the people we met. We didn't have the same attachment as we had in Turkey.
As you said as well, you've heard good things from lots of people. That was the same for us. So that added to this expectation we had of Georgia, and we in this adventure touring cycle handbook, it also talked about how great Georgia is. So our expectations were just really high, and the country didn't really live up to that. But again, it's partly our own fault because we kind of just wanted to get to Tbilisi to do our Chinese visas, and then wanted to get to Azerbaijan and so on, because at the time we were in a bit of a rush anyway, because we were trying to get to Pakistan in time to use our visas. So we didn't really take our time to explore more of the remote areas of Georgia.
Yeah, it's all just situational. It depends who you meet and where you go. I think if we went back, we'd probably have a totally different experience than the one we had.
Did you end up in Pakistan?
We did not, unfortunately. So Pakistan was the only country we had to get visas for before we left our home countries, because you can only apply for the visas in your home countries. So Tim applied while he was in the UK, and I applied in Germany. But of course, we had to do this quite far in advance, and we didn't really know yet when we would get there. but Tim was only able to get a visa that was valid for 6 months, and that was from the visa being granted, so not even from leaving. So we tried to get there within 6 months, but in the end we didn't. And yeah, we were in Tajikistan still when the expiration date of the visa approached, but even a little before that we had decided that it just takes away from the trip that we're constantly in this rush to get to Pakistan, and we just said, okay, we're not going to make it, it's fine, we can go a different route.
I don't think it's such a bad thing that we didn't make it, because when we were in the Pamirs, it was already touch and go whether we could get across them, because the snows were coming, some of the mountain passes were closing. And then if we went to Pakistan, we would have had to do the Karakoram Highway straight after the Pamirs. So that would have been even further into the autumn, winter season. So I'm not even sure we would have made it across the mountains in time anyway on the schedule. But yeah, one day it would be nice to go back and do the Karakoram Highway.
Well, now you're starting to get into Central Asia, and you go through Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. It's about 2,000 kilometers. What was that experience like?
That was really interesting, actually. The landscape, it was pretty much desert for most of it, at least in Kazakhstan, just as flat as you can imagine to the horizon, and super, super straight roads, like camels walking around, this kind of stuff. So a lot of people, they skip this part because they feel their time is better spent in other countries, but we kind of wanted to experience not the boredom of the desert, but just how
the vastness.
The vastness and how uniform it is. And yeah, I think we're pretty happy that we decided to cycle it. It can get boring at times, and you have to motivate yourself to get through the desert. But the camping was super nice. You could look up at the Milky Way, and it's just kind of like meditation, really, cycling through the desert. So yeah, we had a good time there.
Yeah, definitely. And then in Uzbekistan, we saw some of the ancient Silk Road cities as well, like Bukhara and Samarkand, which are just incredibly pretty. It was quite a contrast between the desert and these incredible cities, and yeah, all around quite enjoyable.
Yeah, I think the area from Turkey to the Pamirs, so all of Central Asia, that's probably the most memorable section of the trip. There's so many good experiences around that.
Yeah.
There was a photograph where your bike tire had become caked with tar and little stones. Was that part of, like, when you were going through the desert in Kazakhstan that happened?
No, that was actually in Turkey. So as you say, the road, it was kind of melted asphalt, but not because it was super hot, just because it was bad quality asphalt. So it was probably, low 30s or something.
Celsius.
We had to kind of try and cycle on the edge of the asphalt, so not to get too thick in the melted stuff. But then you would accidentally go into the asphalt, then into the gravel next to it, back into the asphalt, back into the gravel, and eventually you just grow this massive asphalt and gravel on your tire, and then that solidifies, and then you have a tire that doesn't work like it should anymore. Yeah, my tire got stuck. It wouldn't rotate anymore because it was so big. It wouldn't fit through the frame. So we went to the top of a little hill and tried to roll down it as fast as possible to get some of the asphalt just to fling off. But that didn't work. Instead, it just cut a big hole in my chainstays. So on each chainstay, there was a big hole where the asphalt forced its way to make revolutions. So after that, we just had to sit down and manually pick all the asphalt out of the tires, and then go and find a frame welder to fix the bike.
Yeah, and luckily found an aluminium welder in the next town from where we were staying, which did a pretty good job on fixing Tim's bike.
Yeah, for being in Turkey, when we were fixing the bike, some people came and stopped and gave us some Coke and sausage sandwiches and that kind of stuff. So it wasn't all bad.
Yeah, you turned your rear tire into a grinding wheel, and then...
yeah.
But see, this blows the whole theory about having to have a steel frame because you were able to find the aluminum welder.
Yeah, I'm not sure if we were lucky or what, but the first time we tried, there was an aluminium welder. So if you have aluminium and it goes bad, it's not the end of the world like some people might imagine.
After Uzbekistan, I think now you're into Tajikistan. You're getting into the mountains, 1,500 kilometers. And is this where you take like a detour through the Wakhan corridor? And you guys, I was looking at some of these photos, and I think, if I remember right, there's a lot of snow and it looks like a lot of cold. Tell me about your experience through this region.
The Pamir Highway, it's one of the highest paved roads in the world. It goes up to about 4,500 meters. So I think officially it starts in Dushanbe, and then it heads towards the border of Tajikistan and Afghanistan. So there's a river that runs along the border, and for the first part of the highway, you pretty much follow this river. You may be 50 meters away from Afghanistan. All the children over there are waving and shouting at you. So it's super interesting to be so close to a country that's really off limits for most people. The Wakhan Valley, that was an optional detour, but we had to think quite a lot about whether to take this.
That's known to be even harder than staying on the main Pamir Highway because the road quality is quite bad, but it's also known to be incredibly beautiful. So we went back and forth about it, but in the end decided to do the Wakhan Valley rather than staying on the Pamir Highway. Weather-wise, at this point, it was still warm. It was, what was it, August? September?
Yeah, September or something.
So it was, we hadn't climbed up to the plateau yet, so it wasn't cold. But then at the end of this Wakhan corridor, you climb out of the valley up to the plateau, and that's when it started getting cold, obviously. The roads get increasingly bad and very gravelly, stony, and very steep. And you start going up to high elevations, so start dealing with those problems as well, with shortness of breath. Yeah, that was pretty challenging.
Yeah, so some sections would be pushing for 100 meters because it's so loose you can't ride. And then we'd be out of breath already because of the altitude. So maybe at 3,000 or 4,000 meters. So push for 100 meters, stop for a couple of minutes to regain your breath, push another 100 meters. And I think the shortest day on this trip so far was around that area.
Like 23 kilometers or something, of not like it being a half day or anything, but 23 grueling kilometers.
But in my opinion, it was definitely worth it because it's such a stunning area. It's super, super remote. Like, you can go days without seeing other people, especially at the end of the season when we were there. I think earlier on, there's probably a few more cyclotourists, but it's the end of the season when we were there, so the snows were coming and a bit quieter.
Yeah, it was definitely stunning, and there's views of the Hindu Kush over in Pakistan.
Yeah, like 7,000 meter mountains. This kind of stuff.
So, whether it was worth it, yes, but it was also very, very hard.
Well, how low were the temperatures getting?
I think the lowest we recorded was about -10 at night time. I think in the daytime, the lowest was -6 or something.
Something like that, yeah.
So, yeah, we bought extra winter clothing before the Pamirs to prepare for this. So we'd be sleeping in 2 down jackets, all of our other clothes, multiple pairs of socks, all that kind of stuff. And we were just about okay in -10. It wasn't so bad.
What is the width of your tires?
So yours is
Mine are 35, yeah. That's the widest I can fit with my mudguards.
And my front one is 40, and my rear one at the time was 35, because the 40 didn't actually fit in my frame, so I had mismatched tires. But that was fine for the Pamirs. It was loose gravel, but I don't think wider tires would help so much, to be honest.
Next, you are getting into China. You got your first visa, which I think was good for 60 days. And let me look at my notes here. The first thing that I have written here, I pulled off of your blog, is it's because you ended up doing 3 months in China. And you said, after 3 months and nearly 6,000 kilometers, our relationship with China, it's complicated. Was Kashgar, was that one of the earlier cities that you were in?
Yeah.
Is that like the dystopian city?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's in a province of China that is known to be quite dystopian. So, first of all, we got visas before China, but they were e-visas. So China was the first one that we, and the only one that we had to get on the road in a different country. So we got our visas in Georgia. And we got double entry 60-day visas, so we could stay for 2 months, then had to leave, and then could enter for another 2 months. So we entered China into Xinjiang province, which, is known to be quite politically complicated at the moment because historically it's part of Central Asia and not China. So the population there is Muslim and they don't see themselves as Chinese, and a lot of them want Xinjiang to be an independent country. So there's been some separatist violent attacks that led to the Chinese government to subject the entire population, or the entire Muslim population, which is called the Uyghurs, to these dystopian measures. So there's riot police absolutely everywhere. There's lots of metal detectors, airport-style surveillance everywhere, and the Uyghurs have their DNA collected at medical checkups. They have GPS devices installed in their vehicles, and they're sent to re-education camps if they show any signs of being Muslim, really.
Yeah, suspicious activity.
Yeah.
But these re-education camps, they're really massive. Tens of thousands of people are at them currently. And if you have a beard and you're seen with a Quran or something like this, that's probably enough reason to get sent to a re-education camp.
Yeah. So it's quite a bit like an episode of Black Mirror, if you've watched that, like with all the modern technological ways of putting the population under intense surveillance.
Yeah, when we were there in the city, there was a sandstorm blowing through the city, which really kind of added to the atmosphere of this dystopian feeling.
Yeah, it's very scary. Very weird too. And also when you guys came into the country, you had to have all of your devices like scanned, and I don't know what they do. What was that experience like?
Yeah, that was pretty shocking to us as well at the time. So when we entered from Tajikistan into Xinjiang province, we had to give the border police our phones and our laptop and SD cards, etc., and give our passwords to the phones and the laptop, and then everything was taken into a separate room and was scanned and then returned to us a bit later. And we also then found an app on our mobile phones that had been installed, which we had heard about from other cycle tourists, but still it was pretty scary to see this ourselves. And there's been a recent Guardian article about this, like a few days ago, which was really big, was like on the front page of the Guardian. And it was weird to see how big of a story that was, because of course it was shocking to us at the time. But in our bubble of only speaking to other cycle tourists, everyone who went that way knew this was happening. So it's weird to see that obviously not everyone actually knows that this is happening.
So what do you do when you get your devices back? Do you like wipe them and start fresh just to make sure there's nothing, no hidden software on there? Or how did you guys handle that?
Well, they leave the application installed on your device, and there's a big uninstall button. But obviously this is probably just a show, so it makes you feel like you're uninstalling the software that they put on your phone. But in reality, I think they've done everything they want to do already, and that's just to make you feel good. But when you're on the road, it's quite hard to wipe your phone and start again and all this kind of stuff. So we just have to go with it.
Yeah, we just uninstalled the app and left it at that.
Yeah, like what can you do in that situation?
What was the cycling like through China? What was the food like?
For the first bit of China through Xinjiang, we actually got a train for, 2,500 kilometers or something? Because that would have purely been desert the whole time. And also in this state of Xinjiang, so it would have been super complicated to cycle without the police being on your back the whole time. So we got a train to the desert. And then when we did start cycling in Gansu province, so long ago now.
Yeah.
It was quite cold to start with, I remember that.
Yeah, although it got a lot colder when we went up onto the Tibetan plateau. So yeah, once again, we were at elevation. The roads were mostly good.
Yeah, the roads in China are super good. So much money going to them.
Also a lot of roadworks, though.
Yeah, that's true. The driving in China is not as good as the roads. It's probably the first country where we felt a bit threatened by the driving sometimes.
Depending on the road. Yeah, like on some of the narrower country roads, there was some pretty crazy overtaking.
I was going to mention that the police, it sounds like you would try to get on the motorways, and the police and that's not allowed. So you would sometimes be removed and then put on these smaller roads that you're talking about where the drivers are, where there's less space for you, and then the drivers are aggressively overtaking you.
Yeah, so this only happened once. There's these highways, as you mentioned, that you can take. We took one to avoid a big detour, and it was super safe for us because there's a massive hard shoulder.
Yeah. Like we knew we weren't allowed to be on it because when you get onto the expressway, there's a big no bicycle sign, and the woman at the toll gate shouted at us, "No!" And we were like, thumbs up, smiling,
saying hello.
And yeah, just went past the barrier. It was good to make progress and avoid the detour. After a little while, we heard some sirens behind us, and the police stopped us and told us we weren't allowed to be there. So then they had to get 4x4 and a pickup truck.
Yeah. But they were super happy about it. They were taking selfies with us and offering us signals and stuff. So we obviously weren't in deep trouble. It was just they had to get us off the road. So they drove us in their pickup truck to the next exit, which is where we wanted to go anyway. Put us on this smaller road, which was a lot more dangerous than the big road because there was no hard shoulder. And yeah, just a lot thinner and more dangerous.
So you guys are vegetarians, I believe, that I read on your website.
I am. Tim is not.
Okay.
Yes.
For Linda, then, how has it been for you to try to continue on with this diet during a cycle tour?
Well, in Europe, it was pretty easy because we were never eating out. We were just buying our own food and having cheese and bread for lunch and then cooking pasta and whatever for dinner. In Central Asia, it was okay. We ate out sometimes, but the choices were pretty limited anyway. It was usually some rice dish where I would just pick out the meat and give it to Tim. In China, it was sometimes quite challenging, although that was allowed to a large degree because of the communication being really difficult in China. So like in other countries we've been before that, well, either in Europe, a lot of people spoke English, of course, and then in Central Asia, the language that everyone speaks is Russian, and we don't speak Russian, but we learned a little bit of it. And then generally people get that you don't speak Russian, but that you know a few words, so you can kind of make do with that. But in China, people don't get that you don't speak Chinese. They just talk at you in Chinese. When you try to show them something on Google Translate, they try to write stuff down for you in Chinese characters, and it's just not a concept a lot of people get. So when we were trying to order vegetarian food by learning a few Chinese words and trying to show stuff on Google Translate, that didn't always go so well. And there's also big differences in pronunciation of words. So like the word for meat, for example, is sometimes pronounced zhou and sometimes zhao and rao, and there's lots of different regional variation. That was sometimes quite frustrating. But then when we got to Southeast Asia, it got really easy again. There was in Thailand and Malaysia, and surprisingly also in Indonesia, which I wouldn't have expected. It's been really easy to find really nice vegetarian food.
After China, is it Vietnam?
Yeah, so we left China after 2 months because we had these double entry visas. So we went into Vietnam once, then went back into China, and then back into Vietnam.
Did you end up cycling from Hanoi down to Saigon?
No, we didn't do that in the end. So as Linda just said, we were in Vietnam twice. In the first instance, we're right up in the highlands in the northwest of the country. And there's a loop called the Hajiang Loop, and a lot of people do it on motorbikes these days. And that was super stunning. But really, really steep hills, lots of karst scenery, so limestone mountains, and lots of interesting cultures around there. So that was probably one of the highlights of Vietnam. Mm-hmm. And then back into China for another month or so, and then back into Vietnam again. And that time, that was from near Ha Long Bay to Hanoi, and then to the border of Laos. So yeah, that was less scenic that time, but there were still some nice bits.
Well, Ha Long Bay was pretty scenic. Yeah. So we went to an island in Ha Long Bay for a couple of days. And yeah, just seeing all of these karst islands in the South China Sea was pretty amazing. And then, yeah, I mean, Hanoi is a big city. It's a nice big city, but it's still like not that scenic, of course. But then on the way from Hanoi to the Lao border, we had some really nice landscapes again, which we weren't really expecting, but they were a lot more rural than other parts of Vietnam that we'd seen. And yeah, some really beautiful traditional houses. And
yeah, at the time it was one of our favorite countries of the trip,
mm-hmm.
but we didn't want to overdo it by cycling the length to Saigon, because we'd just been in China for 3 months and we felt that we'd slightly overdone it and we'd spent a little bit too long there. So we didn't want to have the same situation with Vietnam. So I thought like 2 entries is probably enough. So that's another trip, I think, cycling in the south.
Well, you mentioned you went into Laos. What was that like?
That was completely different to Vietnam, actually.
Yeah.
Vietnam's quite busy, lots of people everywhere. But for Laos, it's super empty. So you often have the road to yourself. The roads aren't as good and it's often super steep. But no, we really enjoyed it there.
Yeah, and the roads also weren't as bad as we feared. So we heard some bad things, which might be true about some roads that we didn't take, but the ones that we took generally were okay. And yeah, not too challenging.
Yeah, lots of jungle around from what I remember. But also a really interesting history as well. So it's the most bombed country on Earth, I think.
Yeah.
Is that the stat? So we had to be super careful setting up camp in the evening so as not to poke a tent peg into an exploded bomb. So it's quite interesting to learn about this by going to museums that talked about the impact of all these unexploded bombs on the lives of local people.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it was a nice time there.
Yeah, and we also in Laos cycled with another couple that we met online. So we first got in touch with them on Reddit and were also following each other on Instagram, and they were doing a similar route to us at the time. And so eventually we managed to meet up in Laos and cycle together for about 2 weeks, I think. And that was super nice as well, to not just be by ourselves, but have some other people to share stories with as well, and to, yeah, cycle as a group of 4.
Do you run into any American cycle tourists out there?
We actually keep track of all the other cycle tourists we meet on this trip. And we have a page on the website listing everyone we've met and what nationality. And I think we've met 3 Americans out of 86 people in total. And all of those 3 were on the Pamir Highway. We really don't meet many Americans.
No. So it was one couple, and then, on another day, one woman who was at the time traveling with a British guy.
Yeah, which is quite surprising, actually.
Yeah.
How few it is out of 86, only 3 Americans.
Yeah.
There you go.
We heard about some other ones from like Warm Showers hosts or other people or whatever that had recently met other American cyclists, but we personally only met those 3.
Has your style of travel evolved at all along, or I guess over the last year and a quarter?
Yeah, I think we were more rushed to start with in Europe, mainly because we had that Pakistan visa on our mind the whole time. So we wanted to make progress as good as possible. I think even if we didn't make it to Pakistan, that turned out to be justified anyway, because we probably wouldn't have made it over the Pamirs much later anyway because of the winter snows coming. So it definitely felt more rushed at the start, but that was actually a good thing in the end. But since we've been in Southeast Asia, it's been a bit more leisurely. There's been no visa restrictions, and yeah, it's just been a bit more relaxed. And I think also in Europe, it was a bit more dirtbag style because everything there is more expensive. So we never stayed in hotels or anything like that. Whereas here in Southeast Asia, it's a lot more luxurious. But we can, if we want, we can stay in a hotel and eat out and still spend like $5 a day per person or something. So it's just, yeah, a lot more luxurious and relaxed here.
You've met other travelers on the road. What's the best piece of advice that you've received from another traveler?
For me, it's like there wasn't really a single piece of advice I can recall right now, but we're in this WhatsApp group with lots of other cycle tourists, and that's a really good source of advice if you need it. So we've found out a lot of things from discussions in there that we possibly wouldn't have found out about otherwise. So, for example, at one point, people were talking about a certain border in there that we didn't know was open to foreigners. And we would have, if we hadn't found out, taken a massive detour. So it was really good that we read about it in that group. And it can take the fun away a little bit if you just constantly ask about things in that group. So we try to not overuse it, but it's good to know that if you do need help and advice from people, then there is this community that you can get advice from.
If you had to pick out your two favorite, most memorable or favorite moments so far in the bike trip, what would you say?
There isn't like a single most memorable moment or two most memorable moments, really. Although a lot of the moments that have been memorable have been so because of the people we've met along the way. So one episode that comes to mind requires a bit of a backstory first. So last year, there was a terrorist attack on a group of cycle tourists in Tajikistan. I'm not sure how big it was in the news in the US, but 5 men who pledged their allegiance to ISIS killed 4 cycle tourists, so 2 Americans, 1 Dutch and 1 Swiss person. We were in Turkey when we heard about the attack and were heading in the same direction, so we had to have a long and hard think about whether we should change our plans and not go to Tajikistan. But eventually we decided that we would treat this as an isolated incident, and unless we were to hear news of subsequent attacks, we would still go ahead, just like one probably wouldn't cancel plans to visit Paris a couple of months after the 2015 attacks there. So when we were actually in Tajikistan, the locals were incredibly friendly, and we were constantly given food, and people were just happy to see us. On the street, people would thank us randomly just for being there, for visiting. And when we got to where the attack had taken place, we visited a memorial that had since been erected there. When we were about to carry on, a car pulled over next to us, and the driver opened his boot, which was filled with grapes. Some other people had already given us lots of grapes the day before, which happened constantly. So we showed him our bag of grapes and that we didn't need any more or couldn't carry any more. But he took that bag of, somewhat sad-looking grapes off us and emptied it onto the side of the road and filled it with his grapes from his boot, which were obviously superior to the grapes that we already had. And in the moment, we laughed and thanked him, and it was just nice and a little funny. But then a moment later, we realized how symbolic that moment was in terms of showing the huge contrast between this attack that had happened a few months before and how the locals were actually treating us.
Yeah, it kind of sums up the whole trip, really. Like, people at home are really worried about us going to all these dangerous countries, not really knowing anything about them. But you just wouldn't believe the amount of kindness that we've received in these countries. Yeah. And that's, I guess, one of the highlights of the trip in general, just the kindness from strangers throughout the whole time.
Before you start, you probably have this idea what the cycle tour is going to be like because you've read books and you've read blogs and you've seen photos. What's the biggest misperception that you had about what cycle touring is really like?
I think for me, I thought before the trip we'd have lots of free time to read books and to do whatever we wanted in an evening in the tent or whatever. But really, it feels like we've got no free time whatsoever. So I downloaded loads of books to read before the trip, but I've not read a single one, I don't think. Just because at the end of the day, you're so tired and exhausted, you don't want to read a book. And also because if you're wild camping, then it's not great to have lights on when you don't need to have lights on. And then you end up just falling asleep. So free time isn't really a thing when you're cycle touring.
Yeah.
At least not for us two anyway.
No, exactly. Yeah, it's the same for me. Like, I have read 1 or 2 books, but never really find the time for it either. And then when we're not camping, when we're staying in accommodation, there's always tons of other stuff to plan. So plan our route and update the website, write for the blog and edit photos and everything. So that just takes up a lot more time than I think a lot of people realize.
But that's not to say it isn't relaxing. No. It's just the relaxing part of cycle touring is the cycling. And then everything that isn't cycling is generally not relaxing at all. So finding somewhere to sleep, finding food, planning the route, all that kind of stuff is quite stressful. But as soon as you get on the bike and you can cycle, that's when you can just cycle the noise away, really.
Yeah.
Just kind of meditate.
Is there anything that you would change if you could start again?
There's not really that much we would change, to be honest. Mm. A small thing for me is that I would like to take more portraits of people at the beginning of the trip. Like, I'm generally quite a shy person, so it takes a bit of courage to ask a stranger if I can take their picture. I've slowly got better at doing that whilst being in Asia, but it would have been nice to have a few more portraits from the earlier countries. So I would have tried harder early on in the trip to ask people things and to get more portraits.
For me, I also can't really think of any big things I'd change if I were to start again. I think looking back, it would have been good to have a joint blog from the beginning, because when we started, as we started separately, we had 2 separate blogs, and our styles were also quite different, styles of writing, and to a degree also our styles of editing photos. So neither of us wanted to compromise, really, and we just said, okay, we'll have 2 separate blogs. But then in the end, it was just so much work to have 2 blogs that we said, okay, we'll just join our 2 blogs and have one.
Because we've only got one laptop between us.
Yeah.
If we had one each, it would probably be possible, but we just didn't have time to split the laptop up that much.
Yeah. So now what's a little annoying is that some of the early blog posts that are on my blog, which contain some of the stories that Tim didn't go into on his blog, because he generally writes a bit less. Like, I really enjoyed his writing, but it's just a bit shorter and doesn't really go into the stories so much. So those stories aren't really being read because they're on my blog, which isn't being updated anymore.
Yes, I noticed that because when I started reading your blog, I was like, this is great. There's not much. I'm going to get through this really quick. There's not a lot of text. I look at the photos, and then all of a sudden I was like, oh my gosh, where did all these words come from?
Yeah, that's my words.
I want to encourage people to go to the website, which is peddlingtheplanet.wordpress.com, and look at your photographs, because you guys have some great photographs on there.
Yeah, thank you very much.
You already sort of answered it. You said your favorite part is the cycling, but I'll ask the question anyway. What is your favorite part of cycle touring?
I think probably the independence you get from cycling everywhere. So you can pretty much go anywhere you want on a bike, which often means you're quite far off the tourist trail, and also the locals treat you a bit differently when you're on a bike. You don't need a license like when you're driving, so we can go to countries like China, where you cannot drive a car as a foreigner because you need a Chinese license, I think. Yeah, you can just get off the beaten track and do what you want.
Yeah, and compared to people who backpack, some of the areas we've been to, like at the moment, for example, Sulawesi, this Indonesian island we're on, I don't think there's any public transport or anything, so it would be pretty difficult to go to these places and explore them properly. And yeah, we can pretty much go as far as we want to each day, and it just gives us quite a high degree of freedom and, as Tim said, independence.
What's next for you?
So we'll be in Indonesia for another month or so. So right now we're on Sulawesi. In a few days we get a boat down to Flores, and then we'll work our way back across to Bali. And from there, we'll fly to Darwin in Australia.
In Australia, we will mix things up a bit by doing Australia on a tandem, actually. So we've bought a tandem online and have had it sent across Australia to Darwin, and it's waiting there for us with a warm showers host. And we will, when we arrive, post our normal bikes, probably to Sydney or somewhere anyway. And then cycle through the middle of Australia on a tandem. So, which we've decided to do partly, as I said, to mix things up a bit, and also because it looks like going from north to south through Australia will have pretty much a constant headwind. And
it's a big country, and we don't have so much time there. It would be nice to speed things up a little bit so we have some more time to explore the places we want to check out.
And being on a tandem, that should make us a lot faster.
Yeah, and it sounds fun.
Yeah. And then, after Australia, we plan to go to New Zealand, and then maybe we'll go to the US as well, but that's not really decided yet.
Okay. Wow. That's, I'm rooting for you guys to be, and especially to be able to keep that budget low. I think it's going to be a little more challenging now in your upcoming countries. But again, how can people contact you or find you online if they want to learn more?
Yeah, I think the best way is through the website, which you listed earlier. So peddlingtheplanet.wordpress.com.
Peddling with 2 L.
Yes, with 2 L's. Also Instagram, I guess. Mm-hmm. And they're linked on the website as well.
Yeah, in the About section.
Yeah.
Okay, Tim and Linda from Peddling the Planet, thank you so much for coming on the show, sharing your story, and good luck on your upcoming adventures in Australia, or I guess it's a month still through Indonesia, and then Australia and New Zealand, and best wishes to you guys.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, nice chatting.
Thank you for listening. You can find this episode online at thepursuitzone.com/TPZ178. That's TPZ178. Be sure to head over to thepursuitzone.com for the links to subscribe to the show and follow along and like the show on Facebook. You can also follow along on Twitter. The tags are @thepursuitzone. If you want to send me an email, you can do so at paul@thepursuitzone.com. You can also leave a voice message at speakpipe.com/thepursuitzone. This episode was recorded on July 15th, 2019. For the show notes and more great adventure travel podcasts, visit thepursuitzone.com.